Amazon has put the Kindle Scribe in a weirdly interesting position. The Colorsoft gets the attention because it comes closer to a clean black and white e-ink look than any other color e-ink Kaleido tablet I've tested so far. But the regular black and white Scribe is the one that's easy to underestimate. No RGB filter, no added color layer, no darker screen, just a clean, crisp 300 ppi e-ink display with a Frontlight, a passive EMR pen, incredible battery life, very good build quality, and the full Kindle reading experience. And because this is Amazon, the value proposition will probably get even more interesting once the usual discounts start happening. So this review is less about whether the new Scribe is good in isolation and more about whether it has quietly become the most sensible choice for people who just want a large e-ink reader that also works as a solid, easy-to-use notebook. Honestly, I think this version of the Scribe could turn into a real headache for reMarkable's Paper Pure. Starting with the hardware, the new Kindle Scribe feels like a proper premium device. Same as the older model, it has an aluminum back cover and a flush front. But the design language changed quite a bit. The front is always white now, the back is gray, and Amazon removed the old asymmetrical grip. That gives the Scribe a much more modern tablet-like look, and visually I think it works. But from a handling perspective, I'm still a little torn, because as you probably know, I like asymmetrical e-ink tablet designs. They give your thumb a place to rest, and they make the device easier to hold without touching the screen. So part of me still misses the old grip. The new Scribe looks better, no question. But I'm not completely convinced it handles better. You do have to be a bit more aware of where your thumb is, especially when holding it one-handed. That said, Amazon didn't go too far. The bezels are still wide enough that accidental touches are not a constant problem. You adapt pretty quickly, and after a while the missing grip mostly fades into the background. So this is more of a practical preference than a serious flaw. The screen itself is larger now. The old Scribe had a 10.2-inch display. This one moves up to 11 inches. But because Amazon removed the side grip, the whole device is actually not as wide as before and just slightly taller. So in the hand it still feels manageable. Part of that is the weight. Mine comes in at roughly 395 grams, which is noticeably lighter than the original Scribe. With note-taking tablets, we often talk about desk use, because you naturally put them down to write. But with a Kindle, reading is still the core use case. And when you hold something for longer stretches, every gram matters. It's also extremely thin at just 5.4 millimeters. The old model was already thin, so this is not some dramatic transformation, but combined with the lower weight and the more refined design, it helps the whole device feel more modern. And despite being so thin, it still feels sturdy. There's no noticeable flex, no hollow feeling, and no sense that Amazon compromised the structure just to make the spec sheet look better. The rubber feet on the back are also still here, and I'm glad they are. That sounds like such a boring detail, but on a note-taking tablet it really matters. When you put the Scribe on a desk and write, it stays more stable and doesn't slide around as easily. The power button moved to the same side as the magnetic pen attachment. And there's now a slight groove along the frame where the pen sits. That groove is there because the new pen is fully round now. It no longer has the flat side of the older Scribe pen. The pen sits securely, the magnets are strong, and the groove makes it feel more locked in than before. The pen itself is white, which looks much more coherent on the regular Kindle Scribe than it does on the darker Scribe Colorsoft. With the white front and gray back, the whole package feels more intentional. But the more important point is not how the pen looks. It's that Amazon is still using Wacom EMR. That matters a lot right now, because one of the trends in e-ink note-taking devices is that more companies are moving to active capacitive pens. reMarkable did that with its newer devices, and Boox is now doing it too with the Go 10.3 Gen 2. And to be clear, those systems can work well. I don't think a capacitive pen automatically ruins a device. But EMR is still the simpler, cleaner solution for a dedicated writing tablet. The pen is passive, so there's nothing to charge. There's no pen battery to think about, no proprietary charging mechanism at the side of the tablet. And because it's Wacom EMR, you can still swap Amazon's pen for plenty of other compatible pens if you want it. That said, the new Amazon stylus itself is excellent. It has a good weight, a nice hand feel, and a slightly pointier tip than many other EMR pens, which makes it feel a bit more precise. And there's an eraser on top that mimics the feel of an actual rubber eraser surprisingly well. Accuracy is also excellent. Diagonal lines stay clean without the wobble you get with most capacitive pen systems. And writing latency is around just 10 milliseconds, which is the lowest I've measured on any black and white e-ink tablet so far. That makes it noticeably faster than the old Scribe, slightly quicker than the Scribe Colorsoft, and also faster than every competing black and white e-ink note-taking tablet right now. In practice, the line appears almost instantly under the pen tip. There's no sense that the ink is chasing your hand, and that makes writing feel very direct and natural. Honestly, for e-ink, there's not much room to get much better than this, especially if you keep the excellent battery life in the back of your head, which I'll come to later. The reduced pen-to-pixel distance also helps. Compared to the older Scribe, the ink feels closer to the pen tip. That makes writing feel more direct and less detached. Palm rejection is also very good, maybe even the best in the e-ink space. So you don't have to constantly think about how you place your hand on the screen. The writing surface still has that paper-like texture. Under your fingers, it feels very similar to the previous Scribe models, maybe just a tiny bit smoother. And with the pen, the sound is a little different. It's less scratchy than before. I wouldn't call that strictly better or worse. The resistance still feels good. But the writing sound is a bit quieter. And personally, I like that. It makes the Scribe less distracting in quiet rooms. The new screen texture also has a practical benefit compared to the old Scribe. It diffuses reflected light a bit less aggressively, so it doesn't soften the image as much as the older coding. As a result, text, handwriting, and small UI elements look a little crisper and more clearly defined. Compared to something like the reMarkable Paper Pro or Paper Pure, it doesn't have that same tappy pen-on-glass sound, but the display is where the regular Scribe makes its clearest argument. It's using an 11-inch e-ink Carta 1300 panel with a 300 ppi resolution, so this is a clean black and white e-ink screen. And it looks excellent. Compared to the old Scribe, where I measured an L-star value of around 63 to 64 with my spectrophotometer, the new model lands closer to 65 to 66. L-star is basically a measure of perceived brightness, where higher means the surface reflects more light and appears brighter. So contrast is strong, text is crisp, clarity is great, and the whole screen has that calm paper-like quality that still makes black and white e-ink special. That is especially true during the day. In good ambient light, you don't need the Frontlight at all. You just use the screen like paper. And that is still the main advantage of a pure black and white e-ink display. The ColorSoft gets surprisingly close with the Frontlight on at lower settings, but the regular Scribe doesn't need to compensate in the same way. The Frontlight is still there, of course, and it's very useful when lighting is not ideal. With just a very minimal brightness gradient from left to right, it's also one of the most even Frontlights in this size segment, and actually a bit better than what I saw on the Kindle Scribe ColorSoft. Average max brightness is around 102 nits with the cold white LEDs and roughly 85 nits with the warm white LEDs. So easily bright enough for any lighting situation. And at the lowest setting with just 0.1 nits, it's also dim enough if you're light sensitive. Ghosting is the one area where the new Scribe is a bit worse than the old one and more in line with the current competition. In case you don't know the term, ghosting is when faint afterimages from previous content remain visible after the screen changes. That's normal for e-ink to some extent, because the image is created by physically moving particles inside the display. Experience has shown that current e-ink Carta 1200 and especially Carta 1300 panels tend to be more prone to ghosting than some older generations, and the new Scribe isn't an exception. In practice, ghosting is roughly in the same range as on devices like the Boox Go 10.3, Gen 2, Supernote Manta, or Viwood's AI paper. So in other words, afterimages can be a bit more noticeable from time to time, and ideally I'd like to see that effect reduced. But most of the time, it's manageable. Compared to how clean the rest of the display looks though, ghosting is clearly the weakest point here. Now, software is where the Scribe story gets more complicated, because Amazon has improved the Scribe a lot since the original launch, but it still has a very particular philosophy. This is not an open Android tablet like Boox, it's not a pure digital notebook like reMarkable, it's not trying to become a Supernote-style structured note system, it's a Kindle first. But now it's a much better notebook than before. Or maybe more accurately, it's now a solid, easy-to-use notebook attached to an excellent Kindle. The notebook section is now called Workspace, and I actually think that name makes sense. Because it's no longer just a place for handwritten notebooks, you can move books and documents into the workspace, organize files into folders, and treat it more like a project area. So for a specific topic, you can keep notes, documents, and reading material together. That makes the Scribe feel more serious as a work device. You can import files from Google Drive and OneDrive directly on the device. You can also upload notes to OneNote, and that is a surprisingly big deal for a Kindle. The process is fairly seamless. You log in, allow access, and then you can browse cloud files directly on the Scribe and import them. It works with PDFs, EPUBs, Word files, and a few other formats. OneNote export is also useful. Your notes show up in a Kindle Scribe notebook with each page exported as its own page. But it also doesn't make the Scribe fully open. You can't really use Google Drive, OneDrive, or OneNote as a complete replacement for Amazon's own cloud. Once the device is on Wi-Fi, notebooks and documents are still syncing through Amazon's system in the background. So yes, the door is more open now, but you're still inside Amazon's house. For many people, that would be completely fine, especially people already using Kindle readers, Kindle apps, and Amazon's reading ecosystem. But for anyone who wants local-first note-taking, full file control, or a device that adapts completely to their own workflow, the Scribe is still not that. So it's still in that golden Amazon cage. Very comfortable, much less restrictive than before, but still a cage. There's also a privacy footnote. Based on what I can find publicly, it still isn't completely clear that Scribe notebooks are encrypted at rest in Amazon's cloud. Until Amazon clearly confirms the details, I personally wouldn't store truly sensitive information in Scribe notebooks. To be fair, there are not many e-ink note-taking devices I'd recommend for truly sensitive information in the first place. But because the Scribe is so tied to cloud sync, it's worth keeping in mind. The note-taking itself is good. For everyday notes, it's actually very good. You get different pen tools, stroke thickness settings, pressure and tilt sensitivity, and the pencil tool is still one of the best balanced implementations in the e-ink space. The interface is simple enough that you don't get lost in settings, and this is where the Scribe benefits from being a Kindle. It's not trying to offer every possible note-taking feature, it's trying to offer the features most people need in a way that doesn't get in the way. The basics are well implemented. The lasso tool works well. You can copy, paste, and move things around. Folders and subfolders help with organization. The page overview shows up to 9 thumbnails, which makes it easier to find a page quickly. And because the screen is 300 ppi, those thumbnails are actually readable. Amazon also added automatic shape cleanup now. So if you draw a rectangle, oval, triangle, or line and hold the pen on the screen for a moment, the Scribe turns it into a clean, properly drawn shape. There are 30 templates and they're well designed, but you still can't add custom templates. There are also no layers or tags, both of which I'd really like to see added at one point, closing the remaining gap to reMarkable. You also get automatic handwriting recognition in 20 languages for global search. You need to be online for new handwriting to be indexed, but once it's indexed, search works offline too. And importantly, it doesn't cost extra. That point matters because handwriting search is not some luxury feature on a digital notebook. It becomes more important the longer you use the device. After months or years of meeting notes, ideas, scripts, lists, study notes, and random thoughts, search is what keeps everything useful. So the fact that Amazon includes it without a separate yearly subscription makes the Scribe look much stronger compared to reMarkable tablets, where that feature costs extra. In addition to handwriting search, there's also a very useful AI feature that lets you ask questions about your notes and notebooks directly from the search bar. So even if you don't remember the exact wording well enough for a regular search, you can still ask more naturally and have the Scribe help surface the relevant information. You can also use it to quickly generate summaries, which can be especially helpful if you have longer notebooks or meeting notes. And what makes the feature more useful is that it works across all your notebooks, not just inside one file at a time. Of course, the trade-off is that those notes are processed through Amazon's cloud. So if you're writing down sensitive information, that's something to keep in mind. Reading is still the defining part of the Scribe, and this is where the regular black and white model feels completely at home. It's a big premium Kindle with a pen. Buying books from the Kindle store is effortless, your Kindle library syncs across devices, and the reading settings are exactly what you'd expect from a modern Kindle. You can adjust fonts, spacing, margins, and save preferences as themes. And the Kindle Scribe also has a proper system-wide dark mode, something that was missing from the Scribe ColorSoft, but was recently added with a software update there as well. The home screen is still somewhat cluttered with shop recommendations that you can't remove. That's one of those Kindle annoyances that has been around forever, and it still makes the device feel less calm than it could. But Amazon has improved the home area in useful ways. You can create quick notes instantly and move them into notebooks later, and the recently viewed section makes it easier to jump back into books, notes, or documents. Selected ebooks also support Assistive Reader, which is Amazon's text-to-speech feature. It reads supported books out loud through Bluetooth headphones or speakers. And the Kindle Scribe also has the best ebook annotation system in the e-ink space right now. Not because it lets you do everything, but because the different annotation options are so practical. You now have several ways to add notes. You can write directly on the page, where the book text reflows around your handwritten note. That is the big difference compared to just scribbling on top of a fixed page. You get proper space for your thoughts instead of being limited to tiny margins. The downside is that you still can't freely mark up individual words like you would on competitors. So if you want to circle a specific phrase or draw an arrow to one word, the Kindle doesn't really work that way for regular ebooks. It switches into this reflow style annotation mode instead, but at least you can still underline or highlight words easily using the pen. But honestly, I think that's a pretty small trade-off for how much more practical the system is overall, because in return, your notes become much more readable, the book layout adapts around them, and you don't run into the usual problem of trying to squeeze handwriting into margins that were never designed for it. You can also add notes in the sidebar, which is basically the digital version of writing in the margins. The note stays anchored to the relevant part of the text, and it keeps the page cleaner. Sticky notes are still here too. Originally, they felt like a workaround. You dropped a pin on the page and attached a handwritten note instead of handwriting feeling naturally integrated into the book. But now that there are more annotation options, sticky notes make more sense as one tool among several. Sometimes you just want to attach a longer thought without changing the page layout. Type notes are also still available with the on-screen keyboard. Or you can use handwriting input and turn handwritten text into typed text system-wide. So overall, ebook annotation on the Scribe is not just good. It's one of the main reasons to buy this over other e-ink note-taking tablets if reading is part of your workflow. You also get the usual Kindle helpers, dictionary, Wikipedia lookup, and built-in translation. One auto mission remains Kids mode. Unlike most other Kindles, the Scribe models still don't have a dedicated Kids mode. So that's something to keep in mind for family use. The one thing I still don't think is implemented all that well is exporting annotated ebooks. The export is done as a PDF, but the annotations are shown on their own without the surrounding book text that gives them context. That's fine for reviewing your notes, but it's not ideal when you want a proper annotated copy. PDFs are more straightforward. You open a PDF, write directly on the page, and the annotations stay there. The Scribe still doesn't have the most advanced PDF tools on the market. Boox is clearly stronger for that, but the basics work much better than they used to. You can switch to landscape mode, adjust margins and contrast, and pinch to zoom is reliable enough to actually use. And panning around a zoomed in document is smooth within e-ink expectations. And there's also one huge improvement here. PDFs can finally be copied onto the Scribe via USB and still be annotated directly on the device. That sounds like such an obvious thing, but for the Scribe, it's a really big upgrade. Previously, if you wanted the full PDF annotation workflow, you basically had to go through Send to Kindle or one of Amazon's cloud-based import options. Now you can just connect the Scribe to a computer, copy over a PDF, open it, and write on it. That makes the device much more flexible. And it also weakens one of my biggest complaints about the Amazon workflow. This is a major step in the right direction because you no longer have to route everything through Amazon's cloud just to mark up a document. To get it off the tablet with your annotations in place, you still need to go through the export options though. Exporting PDFs works through the same sync options as notebooks and books. You can send them by email or push them to Google or Microsoft Cloud Storage, and the annotations are embedded directly into the PDF. So what you receive looks like what you wrote on the device. Audible is also built in, and listening over Bluetooth headphones or speakers works well. But audiobook support is limited to Audible. You can't sideload audiobooks from other sources. And Amazon still hasn't brought immersion reading to Kindle hardware, which is strange. That's the feature where you listen to the Audible audiobook while reading along in the Kindle ebook. But WhisperSync for voice is available, so you can switch between ebook and audiobook on supported titles, as long as you own both. Battery life might actually be the strongest point of the Kindle Scribe. For writing, the Scribe performs incredibly well. In my continuous handwriting test using a handwriting robot, I measured around 16 hours on a single charge, which is the longest runtime I've measured on any e-ink tablet so far. And even with the Frontlight set to 40 nits, which I consider the sweet spot for good readability in almost any situation without blasting your eyes, it still lasted over 13 hours. That's genuinely impressive. The reading numbers are even better. With the Frontlight off, I measured over 60 hours of ebook reading, and even at 40 nits, the Scribe still managed around 40 hours. Together with the passive EMR pen, which also doesn't need charging, the whole device becomes extremely low maintenance. And honestly, I have no idea how Amazon pulled this off in such a slim body while still delivering a snappy user experience and that extremely low pen latency. Other companies usually compromise somewhere. Battery life, responsiveness, thickness, standby behavior, something. But here, you kind of get all of it. The Kindle Scribe is the best e-ink tablet battery experience I've had with any device I've tested so far. So where does this leave the Kindle Scribe? Honestly, I think this is the first Scribe that fully makes sense to me. Not because Amazon turned it into a full-blown productivity tablet or because it suddenly became the most advanced digital notebook. If you want maximum flexibility, Android apps, deep PDF tools, and a workflow you can bend easily in every direction, this still isn't the device. But that's also not really the point. What Amazon did here is make the Scribe much easier to live with. The writing experience is fast, accurate, and low maintenance thanks to EMR. The battery life is incredible, especially for writing. The ebook annotation system is easily at best in the e-ink space right now. And the note-taking side has finally reached a point where it feels solid instead of unfinished. Sure, there are still things missing that I'd like to see, like tags, layers, or custom templates, but compared to the original Scribe launch, this has matured quite a bit. It no longer feels like Amazon just added pen support because the hardware allowed it. It feels like annotating and note-taking is actually a very useful part of the product right now. The biggest trade-off is still the same as always, Amazon's ecosystem. And that's a funny contradiction here. The golden cage is exactly why the reading experience is so convenient, polished, and seamless. You get less freedom, and also less friction. What changed with this generation is that the compromise feels much easier to accept. Google Drive, OneDrive, OneNote Export, handwriting search, shape cleanup, and USB PDF annotation all make the Scribe feel much less limited than before. So compared to something like the Boox Go 10.3 Gen 2 Lumi, the Scribe is not a productivity pick. And compared to reMarkable, it's still not the purest notebook. But if you mainly read, annotate books, and take notes without needing the deepest feature set, and want a device that's simply dependable, the Scribe suddenly becomes a really strong middle ground. At $500 or 520 euros, the Scribe definitely isn't cheap. But I also wouldn't call it outrageous for what you're getting. And once the usual Amazon discounts start showing up, the value for money could become very hard to beat. Honestly, even at full price, this exact hardware package is basically impossible to find anywhere else right now. A 300 ppi black and white e-ink display with a very uniform Frontlight, EMR pen support, around 10 milliseconds of writing latency, and battery life this good. Some competitors can match individual parts of that, but not the whole combination. That's really the reason I like the regular Scribe more than I expected. It's not perfect, it's still missing features I'd like to see, but for reading ebook annotation, everyday notes, PDF markup, and just picking the thing up without worrying about battery, pen charging, or standby drain, the Scribe gets a lot of the boring but important stuff right. Like and subscribe if you found this video helpful, and to not miss my upcoming comparisons to the reMarkable Paper Pure and Boox Go 10.3 Gen 2. Thanks for spending your time watching, and I'll see you in the next one.